The checklist for autism toddlers is CHAT, and it's a screening tool that can be used by your developmental pediatrician to evaluate. And a lot of this information is also in your handout too, so I don't want to read it all, and like I said, I have a lot to cover. But the 5 key chat items is pretend play, demanding something like I want that or that or that, following a point, doing real pretend play, not just lining up your toys, and pointing. If your child fails all 5 key items, they have a high risk for developing autism. So if you go in and get an evaluation, it will help you not be in denial maybe, make appropriate decisions as to how you want to proceed with your child. And even when you go in and get an evaluation, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do anything about it. When my child was evaluated, I'm like, no, that can't be. That's not my child. I don't believe that. So part of the whole healing process is actually accepting also that there is something with your child, and if you can't even get to that point, you can't make decisions to do anything. And as a parent, that's one of the hardest steps to take, to actually admit there's something wrong with my child, and then I better do something about it. There are also specific testing tools, and these are just a list of several of the tools that are available that you can use to evaluate your child. I'm not saying one is best as the other, but just to educate yourself. I like parents to know all the information that's out there. If you don't educate yourself, you cannot implement anything. You need to be able to be aware of the different things that are out there so you can make the best choices for your child. Remember, ultimately, it's your responsibility. Your child is your responsibility. If you don't educate yourself, how are you going to know to make any choices? And as I said, it helps you make the best choices for your child and your family. So there's basically 3 treatment approach areas for autism that you can consider: behavioral educational, sensory issues, and health problems. So I'm going to cover the behavioral educational interventions first. They cover educational type programs and sensory integration. Oh, I'm just breaking it out, that the sensory integration covers speech, occupational, physical therapy, and auditory interventions. And as I mentioned earlier, no one treatment works for every child. What works for one might not work for another, but success may often include the combination of several treatments. Like you might want to use one kind of behavioral approach, and then maybe use one type of sensory integration approach, and then maybe work your way into one kind of biomedical approach. And one thing I also mentioned to parents is go slowly. Don't jump into everything that you hear this weekend all at once. Pick something that you think suits yourself and your family. Work with that for a little while, then introduce something else. Keep a diary on your kitchen counter, even for behavioral, for biomedical, for sensory, for whatever. Because all of a sudden, things kind of like insidiously creep up on you. For example, my child, we were so fortunate. We got Fast Forward, which is a reading program, implemented in her public school program. And all of a sudden, she started having a boom of language. And I'm a biomedical background. I'm like, well, gee, I haven't changed anything in her diet, and I haven't given her any biomedical changes. And I went in and talked to some of the therapists at school, and they're like, oh, yeah. After they finish the program, about 3 to 4 weeks afterwards, they start to have a boom of language. You know, and it's so hard when you're in your day-to-day life to keep track of what's going on. If you just keep like go to the dollar store and buy a little spiral-bound notebook, keep it on the kitchen counter, and just jot down, she said this today, or he said that today, or, you know, he went and took something out of the cabinet and brought it to me, or, you know, quit flapping, quit stimming, just to remind yourself as the weeks progress what's going on. And again, interventions go hand in hand. When my child was first diagnosed, we proceeded the normal developmental early intervention plan. You go to this school system, they get evaluated, they say this, and this is wrong with your child. You qualify for speech services. Brought her to speech, and she threw herself on the floor and screamed. And every week I brought her to speech 3 times and threw herself on the floor and screamed. And the speech therapist is like, you know, we're really, really not getting anywhere. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. And this was when we were first diagnosed. I didn't know anything from anybody. I lived in rural Mississippi in the middle of nowhere, had no access except for the internet. I'm like, what am I going to do? And a friend of mine gave me some papers on biomedical interventions, and I tried one type of supplement, and all of a sudden she was able to at least vocalize. And when I brought her back after being on the supplement for 2 months and brought her back to the speech therapist, she could go A, B, C, and the therapists were like, oh my gosh, what did you do? So in that way, I'm trying to explain to you how sometimes biomedical and behavioral need to go hand in hand so you can have the most efficient, effective outcome for both. Okay, so this is just kind of like an overview of behavioral and educational therapies. There are different kinds, and like I said, you have to kind of pick the one that works best for you and your family type. So the 3 that I'm going to review, or the few that I'm going to review this morning are some of like the quote-unquote more noticeable, well-aware ones that are out there. Also, some of these are being presented by presenters this weekend, so that's why I picked these to just review. So we're going to go over just very, very briefly, because the speakers who are invited to speak about these topics know way more about it than I do. And I've actually only implemented a couple of these personally and have worked with families who've used a few of these. But ABA, DIR, and RDI. And you'll have the lovely pleasure later on this afternoon of hearing Doreen Graben-Pichet actually talk about biomedical applications for behavioral interventions, and she's actually going to talk about how to help your child take supplements that are recommended. Because, you know, you go and you hear these biomedical conferences and like, well, you gotta take this, 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 and this, and this. You're like, how in the world am I supposed to get my child to actually take this medication? Many times these kids are orally defensive and you can't put anything near their mouth, on their mouth. So she's gonna go over some wonderful ways on how to help your child physically be able to do this. ABA is more for like the structured type families. It focuses on one-on-one. It's very systematic approach, and it's consistent. It goes over something called discrete trials, which is a breakdown of a single event into small little baby steps. So if you were like trying to teach your child how to brush their teeth, you would say, first we walk in the bathroom, then you pick up your toothbrush, then you pick up the toothpaste, then you unscrew the top of the toothpaste, so it's very, very systematic, and you go over each little piece one at a time, and they're rewarded when they've accomplished the steps in appropriate order, and they're not rewarded if they stim or hum or don't follow the steps accordingly. And some families, you know, thrive on this type of approach, and I've heard children do phenomenal on this kind of strict, rigid, you know, controlled type of intervention. Then there's something called floor time. This was more my kind of thing. I'm like kind of like all over the place, and I'm like get on the floor, interact. You know, I want to smile, I want to, and you know, it depends on time. And some people do a little bit of both too. Some people are real strict about certain parts of their daily schedule, so they want to make certain parts of their schedule ABA, and then something a little more, you know, free. This is Serena Weeder. Her and Stanley Greenspan developed developmental individual different relationship-based. I like floor time better. I can't say that. That's a mouthful. And it's really good because it helps engage the child. You know, you're really in there on the floor trying to get eye contact, trying to get them to engage in whatever activity, whether it's playing or rolling or pushing a ball back and forth. And again, this focuses on developmental milestones. This was a concept that I couldn't understand because I kind of like think of things in outline form. It made sense to me to go through developmental milestones because like people would consider about doing biomedical interventions and like, well, I gave that supplement and they just started babbling. I'm like, well, your child never went through the babbling stage. That makes sense. You know, a child just doesn't come out of the womb talking. You know, they babble and then they start to make sounds and then they start to say single words. And so you have to think about that when they start developing language. And so DRR kind of focuses on the fact that you hit your developmental milestones as you go along and progress along that theme, and it makes you realize that if they are babbling or if they are making some sounds, because some kids don't even make any sounds, that, hey, we're going through developmental milestones, this is great. So they hit the terrible twos at 8. Big deal, at least they hit the terrible twos. You know, you want to see advancement. And RDI is another behavioral intervention. This was developed by Stephen Gutstein, and this focuses on dynamic intelligence. And this is a family-based intervention. It gets everybody involved. The whole family gets kind of like trained on this, and a therapist. And the big thing on this is like learning emotional inference. Like kind of like when you see somebody and you kind of glance, or somebody tells a joke and you understand that it's a joke and it's funny. It teaches those kind of like emotional skills that are intuitive to neurotypical people, but not necessarily to the autistic person.